It's always interesting to hear how people interpret reading the books out loud. So for this segment, I've asked Richard to pick a favorite passage and read it to us. So what did you pick, and what do you like about it?
So, this is from chapter 6 of book 2, Lothlorien.
Yes.
So, I am on page 334 of this edition. So, they've just escaped Moria. Gandalf has just fallen. And so they're starting to walk. Gimli says, "There lies the mirror. Now long shall I journey ere I have joy again. It is I that must hasten away, and he that must remain." So the company now went down the road from the gates. It was rough and broken, fading to a winding track between heather and whin that thrust amid the cracking stones. But still it could be seen that once long ago a great paved way had wound upwards from the lowlands to the dwarf kingdom. In places there were ruined works of stone beside the path, and mounds of green topped with slender birches, or fir trees sighing in the wind. An eastward bend led them hard by the sward of Mirror, and there, not far from the roadside, stood a single column broken at the top. "That is Durin's stone," cried Gimli. "I cannot pass without turning aside for a moment to look at the wonder of the dale." "Be swift, then," said Aragorn, looking back towards the gates. "The sun sinks early. The orcs will not maybe come out till after dusk, but we must be far away before nightfall. The moon is almost spent, and it will be dark tonight." "Come with me, Frodo," cried the dwarf, springing from the road. "I would not have you go without seeing Keled Zaram." He ran down the long green slope. Frodo followed slowly, drawn by the still blue water in spite of hurt and weariness. Sam came up behind. Beside the standing stone, Gimli halted and looked up. It was cracked and weather-worn, and the faint runes upon its side could not be read. "This pillar marks the spot where Durin first looked in the mirror, said the dwarf. "Let us look ourselves once ere we go." They stooped over the dark water. At first they could see nothing. Then slowly they saw the forms of the encircling mountains mirrored in a profound blue, and the peaks were like plumes of white flame above them. Beyond there was a space of sky. There, like jewels sunk in the deep, shone glinting stars, though sunlight was in the sky above. Of their own stooping forms no shadow could be seen. "O Heled Zaram, fair and wonderful," said Gimli, "there lies the crown of Durin till he wakes. Farewell." He bowed and turned away, and hastened back up the green sward to the road again. "What did you see?" said Pippin to Sam, but Sam was too deep in thought to answer.
Yeah. That's beautiful. What made you pick that, and what do you like about it?
Yeah, I find the relationship of the narrative present to the past in Lord of the Rings fascinating. There are no museums in Middle Earth, right?
Except at Mickle
Thing,
Delving, but that doesn't count.
yeah. Um, and, things are either functional and maintained, or they're not functional and they're not maintained.
Yeah.
And if they're not functional and they're not maintained, they still represent a memory, but not a memory that we have to preserve in amber, right? There's not a sense of the way it was originally built has to be kept pristine, according to some idealized notion of how it was when it was first built.
Sure.
But it's about function, and it's about present day context. Also tied to that is this idea of different scales of memory, right? Because when the elves being thousands and thousands of years old, they represent a living memory that gets said explicitly in the prologue, right? Of things that happened hundreds, thousands of years ago, where so something that maybe humans remember in poetry, they can talk to an elf who was there,
Right.
right? And so it's like, you would potentially have a ruin in the narrative present where the elf is like, yeah, I remember standing on this when it was brand new.
Right.
So just that whole web of how memory is transmitted, how that gets reflected in the landscape and the monuments, and in the condition of the landscape and the monuments. I find that fascinating.
Right.
As somebody with a historian's training, I just find that really interesting.
Right. And that makes a ton of sense to me and resonates with what struck me, which is that this is the payoff for a previous appearance of poetry, which happened only a couple hours before for the characters. They're standing in the great hall, and one of the hobbits, I think, calls Moria this, these dark holes, and Gimli says they are not dark holes, and he recites a poem that talks about, it starts. And again, reflecting on the same things you're saying. The world was young, the mountains green, no stain yet on the moon was seen, no words were laid on stream or stone when Durin woke and walked alone. He named the nameless hills and dells, he drank from yet untasted wells, he stooped and looked in mirror, and saw a crown of stars appear as gems upon a silver thread upon the shadow of his head. It's striking. Even after everything that has happened in the present, he won't leave without going and drinking deeply of that memory and that grief and of seeing what he's heard. Because he's
without making a pilgrimage,
right. And I liked what you said. An elf can say, "Well, I remember it," but for dwarves and men, poetry, fulfills that function of preservation, even as they let it go.
Transmission and preservation.
Right.
Yeah.
The memory is preserved while allowing the thing to change. Which is a tension that's all over the place.
Absolutely.
In Lord of the Rings.
Absolutely.
Now I want to hear how you would apply that to the fire and the reconstruction of Notre Dame in Paris.
Oh gosh, that's a very complicated question. The thing of it is that cathedrals, often would take centuries to build. Hagia Sophia is kind of a very rare case of something that was able to be built, quickly because it had the full resources of the empire behind it. But even with Hagia Sophia, you have layers of things that are added later. The dome obviously is a replacement. The walls haven't fallen down because of supports that the Ottomans added. I mean, this is sort of almost a building a tower with old stones problem, or
right.
A ship of Theseus problem even.
Right.
What represents reconstruction? What represents rebuilding something?
Sure. And the question you raised too of, in Tolkien's world, things are either used, but if they're not being used, they're not maintained. But we have a whole civilization of preserving things that we won't use. That's not just overseas in post-Christian Europe. In our parishes too, we have, this is how they built it. The founders who established the church, can't change anything.
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
It's like, but it has to be a usable space.
The acoustics of Notre Dame were enabled by a certain kind of wood that was used in the interior that doesn't exist anymore, or is much harder to come by now. So that was a problem that they had to solve.
Sure.
In the restoration, you have these centuries old churches that now have electric lighting and neon exit signs and things like this. It's complicated.
Yeah.
It's very complicated.